two really powerful speakers here. So I want you to sit with what you've experienced, and I want to invite our two speakers to come up. Hanin Majadi, I hope I'm saying it, sorry? Majadli, and Michael Manikin. Please come on up. Okay, so Michael is going to speak first. You've met him earlier. And may I ask you to introduce yourself and say what you want about yourself before you speak. Each of our speakers is going to speak for, let's say, around 8 minutes or so. And think about what you want to ask them. I'll be moderating the questions later. Michael, please come on up.
Okay, I don't know why I just did that. I already introduced myself. I'm not going to do that again. But I do want to know who here has been in South Hebron Hills? Okay, so there are a bunch of people. And who here has been part of a protective presence? Okay. So I thought of spending the couple of minutes that I have to basically share some personal perspectives. I will say that it actually predates the Smol Emuni in Israel, and also is part of the Smol Emuni now. There's a group, an activist collective called Bnei Avraham, work quite a bit in Hebron primarily, but also in South Hebron Hills and increasingly in the Jordan Valley. And I wanted to share some thoughts about why we decided to show you those scenes, if it's okay with you. It's also very weird, for me at least, to have people watch this movie. I will say I was a bit reluctant to watch it for a while. In terms of my patriotism is particular to the city of Jerusalem and to its activists, and this is a very Jerusalem activist movie. In terms of Yuval, a lot of the activism protective presence, and I'll say what that means in a minute, started from a group called Tayush in the early 2000s, and specifically in the South Hebron Hills. So where Yuval and Bassel filmed, and Bassel himself grew up, and I think it's mentioned in the film as well, in a atmosphere where there's quite a steady presence of Israeli and Palestinian activists and international activists for quite some time, at least since 2000, 2001. I think the questions that Yuval raises, and I'm speaking particularly more about Yuval as a Jew here on the panel. A lot of the questions that he is raising and are raised towards him in the minutes that we watched are things that a lot of us think about. What is the role and what are the challenges of Israelis who work with Palestinians in the territories? I do want to say some comments about that. The first is that a lot of times these types of actions are viewed as humanitarian, but they're in fact, other than being humanitarian, deeply political. One of the strongest methods we have found of keeping land with their owners is through protective presence. The reason there's protective presence for those who watched the film and for those who didn't is that both settlers and military have been pushing Palestinians off their land for either through demolitions or through settler violence, particularly shepherds or agriculture, because the West Bank works under Ottoman law in terms of private property. Basically, the system of law in the West Bank is that the person who is responsible at the time, the occupier at the time, now it's Israel, basically works on the law that pre-existed. It dates all the way back to the Ottoman period, which means that if Palestinians don't work their land for a specific amount of years, then they lose access to it. So the notion of protective presence is both to keep people on their land in the very immediate sense, but also to make sure that their land is owned for a longer period of time. And the idea of protective presence, or even just presence, is to try to curtail that with the understanding that Israelis have that, and sometimes internationals, that when you are in the field, then you have an ability to perhaps help both on violence, but also help people maintain access to land. South Hebron Hills is a specific area of South Hebron Hills, primarily Misafriyata, is indicative of that, but also some areas in Hebron, small areas, and increasingly areas in the Jordan Valley, both the southern part of the Jordan Valley and the northern Jordan Valley. I always feel it's important to put some information into the room on this conversation, because a lot of times, and especially because the scene happened in the middle, and there isn't a lot of what is called context. So that is a context, I think, of a lot of the work. And the question which is asked, and I think that's the question which relates to a lot of the people sitting in the room as well, is what are the role and what are the challenges of people who are responsible but don't necessarily pay the price for a lot of what's happening. So many of us have found themselves sleeping in areas in the West Bank during protective presence, but it's very clear for me that once I leave, once I'm done, I go home, and then other people can potentially pay a price. It's a conversation which happens a lot. From an activist perspective, a lot of guilt is involved, and there have been a lot of theories or rules which have developed over the last 20 years in terms of how you're invited to an area, what is your role that you play in the area, and so on. So those are sort of initial thoughts. I think the frustration shared by Yuval and Basel about the immediacy of ending occupation is becoming much more clear for a lot of us, or the lack of immediacy. And then the question is, what is basically the role of what you're doing? And I think for a lot of us, the role of what we're doing, other than the immediate and other than the land control, it's also the access to, I'm saying for a lot of us Jews, it's the access to land, not through a place of domination, but through a place of partnership. Lastly, I want to say in the context of Faithful Left is that one of my frustrations with Tayush, which are like all my Rebbes, and have been around since 2000, as I said, is that a lot of the actions happened on Shabbat. So a lot of us would do work on Thursdays and Fridays, but a lot of the activists, people like Ezra Nawi or Amiel or David Shulman or others would go down on Shabbat. But there have been in the last 2 months a new initiative, which is to do a full Shabbat in the Jordan Valley of protective presence of religious people. I think a lot of what we're trying to figure out in terms of religious presence is how do we access conversation given two contexts. A, that a lot of the people who live in Area C are deeply traditional, and there's a lot of relationship regarding the land from a traditional to a traditional perspective, not in a normalizing way, but in a joint resistance way. And the second would be that a lot of the attackers, other than military, are people who look very similar to us. So the question of what does it mean to be a religious Jew in a context where religious Jews are attacking is equally significant, or even for me at least more significant than the question of what does it mean to be an Israeli in these areas. So that's just like initial thoughts of sharing. And Hanin, you're gonna come? Bye.
So my name is Hanin Majadli. I'm a Palestinian citizen of Israel. I'm a Haaretz journalist. I write a weekly opinion article, and I edit the Haaretz Arabic edition online. Okay, I wrote things because otherwise I will forget. So, Michael, you've been to Masafir Yatta more than I have, so you can probably describe, and you just did, what's happening there better. But what struck me and amazed me the most in the film, especially in the part, was the normality, which is not normal or abnormal in Israel, of Basil and Yuval together in the car, a Palestinian from the occupied territories and an Israeli. It's absurd on the level of a white man sitting next to a black man in segregation-era America. It's not just racial segregation, it's enforced by military control. And the journey Yuval went through overcoming the obstacle of the security-minded IDF and on the IDF consciousness, as well the segregation and fear that Israelis are full of towards Palestinians. And he overcome all this, I find, as something incredibly moving, especially because he represents a different model of Israeli activists. You know, dark skin, like me, an Arab Jew, Arabic speakers, stripped of any sense of ownership and entitlement without any sense of גואל. הוא לא בתפקיד הגואל של הפלסטינים. I'm very surprised by how far Israelis, generally speaking, are willing to go to defend and justify crimes using all kinds of excuses and explanations, even when things seem clearly, like the sun, so unfair and un-Jewish, speaking of Jewish values and ethics, and clearly crimes. Many still find a way to justify them. I believe this comes from the deep and violent dehumanization, long dehumanization of Palestinians in Israeli and Jewish society, seeing them as almost not human. And when that is the mindset, the path of the worst crimes becomes very short. The sense of numbness, kihut hachushim in Hebrew, and the loss of basic justice only grow stronger. Thank you.
I think what we want to do is collect a couple of questions and then have our panelists respond.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to review the questions. Two are about, kind of the broader term context of the movie. Who orders the removal of Palestinians? The concept of eminent domain is familiar to us here. Is there ever a good reason for this? Is there restitution, land swaps, whatever it is? And then a different question, what about the censorship of this movie in Israel, the difficulty seeing it here? What thoughts do you have about it?
Okay, so I'll take the first two questions. Context is, first of all, I mean, we need to not confuse the word context and justification. Those are two similar concepts, but also very, very different. I will try to provide some context, but it is worth mentioning that also in the South Hebron Hills, it's really a case-by-case scenario. There's a larger picture that one can discuss, and that's really looking at sort of like larger Israeli strategies or Israeli military strategies of land grabs. But maybe I'll say just a word about that in the end. So there is one sovereign between the land and the sea, and that is Israel. And the people who are responsible for sovereignty in the West Bank is the Israeli military, as controlled by the Ministry of Defense. So the Israeli military orders evacuation. It gets a bit more complicated in the settler context because the settlers do hold by they have police and police administer Israeli law to settlers, and military administer martial law to the Palestinians on the same land. Regarding evacuations, they could be done for a number of reasons. In the context of what we just saw now, it is part of a larger story of Israel wanting to designate an area called 918 for military training, and I urge you to watch the full film, and there's a bit of an explanation about that. But there's actually quite a bit online regarding 918. It is true, and a lot of the critique is that the Israeli High Court, which Palestinians can appeal to, ordered that 918 is legal. That being said, while they can appeal, there's only representative of Israelis in high court, and there aren't representative Palestinians. So the system in itself is a system which is highly unequal. Regarding the history, and that is also worth sort of acknowledging and understanding, that a lot of the residents, the Palestinian residents of the South Hebron Hills, historically, actually have two areas where they lived, which is an agricultural system, by the way, similar to how the stories that I know from my grandparents in Eastern Europe, where you have a home in which you live and a home where there's agriculture. The home where many of them lived was, if you know that area, it's in the Arad area, and they were basically expelled from that area in the early 1950s, moved up to the area where they are work in agriculture, but that area isn't zoned or designated as agriculture area, as living area, but rather as agriculture, which means that it's easier to evacuate them. I do urge also, if anybody's interested, next time you're in the region, you can take a tour with Breaking the Silence to that area, and I think you'll get quite a bit of information also on the legalities. Lastly, regarding what is to do. So it is important for me to stress these things are not only sort of, I think you termed it pissing matches. If they were, it would be incredibly futile, as one side is incredibly stronger than the other side. They're rather a deep understanding of the field and how does one maintain access to property through Israeli-administered different systems of law, in terms of how to maintain control of land. So there are actually villages that were left due to settler violence in the last 20 years and returned to be in existence due to these types of actions. So they're actually very effective in terms of, last year has made it a series of new challenges, but they're historically, at least in the last 20 years, are incredibly effective in terms of what can be done. But it's obviously minor, and the only way to end is to create a democratic system in the area where people can be represented, where the legal system represents the people who live there and not the interests of people who are not there.
I can answer the question about the censorship. Absolutely, things got worse. It will be a kind word to describe what's happening in Israel in the last year and a half. But for me, it's not surprising, because Palestinian movies and books, theaters, been censorship and silenced for too long in Israel. And I think that a lot of Israelis, the liberal democratic in Israel, in the couple of, last years, they're beginning to understand that they are also being treated like Palestinians, silenced and censorship. So when Israelis also shake the Israeli narrative and mindset, they're, treated as Palestinians. So in this case of no other land, because it's Israeli-Palestinian, it came to, fame. But if it was just Palestinian, no one would hear about it. So it's not surprising. You want to say that?
Yeah, just on the very tactical, I don't know the American context well enough. I do know that that the producers in Israel are contactable for screenings, and if personally, if you're interested in organizing screening, talk to me and we'll make
now
that
listen,
happen.
the rest of the world has to come back to this room, so let's go on with a few more questions. One was, what can we do to support these efforts? The second, and I think they're kind of connected, is the assault and the arrest, retribution for the Oscar win. Are there other retributions that the filmmakers, producers, investors, whatever, are facing? Is this negativity tied to this particular government? Is it maybe more endemic or a specific individual? And then related, but sort of different, can you say something about conscientious objection by Israelis who are, up for military service or miluim or something like that?
So Regarding what can be done, first, I do think that the information level is actually really acute, and there's quite a bit that can be read and can be seen, and also be challenged. Like I urge people who watch this movie to be skeptical of the information and to try to check it and say, wait a minute, what are other things happening, and learn about it, and then come to the right conclusion, and also or their conclusion. And when you come to our neck of the woods, you should go see it on your own. It's very, Safriyata for sure, it's very easy to go and see. Usually, I said through Breaking the Silence, but I imagine there are other tours, and I know there are international organizations and international Jewish organizations as well who work in those areas. I think that type of support is necessary, and I also think a lot of it is about not, from the activist perspective, definitely when things happen, is not feeling alone. Knowing that there are people who are supporting from other areas is actually really, I think, significant and important. That's what I would say regarding doing things. And regarding the question of, violence is it's like those types of areas, it's a spectrum which there is definitely effect over the last administration, and it's gotten substantially worse on many regards. In terms of the demolitions, but also in terms of the ability of activists to work in those areas. So that's definitely the case, but it is also worth mentioning that it's very much built into the system of military occupation since '67. So in many contexts, it's different, and in many contexts, it's the same. I would say that before talking about conscientious objection, it's important to talk about universal conscription. Sorry for my socialist answer to your question. I actually really think it's one way of dealing with things is actually having everybody serve, or at least everybody obligated to serve. I think there are a lot of different contexts, which you probably know better than me, where basically countries send the poor to serve, so you don't even know things that are happening, and it's actually really important to engage. I think that the most relevant way to have a conversation about whether things are moral or immoral is to actually have everybody engage in them. I think it's also the so I know that's a bit of a roundabout way to answer your question. I will say that there's quite a bit of tiredness of service. This is not connected to South Hebron Hills regarding Gaza right now. People have been serving for a very long time. And it's not, and definitely this last round, there are many lower numbers of people going. Some of that might have moral rationale, some of that has tiredness rationale. But I also know, conversely, that soldiers who serve usually serve. Like if you're obligated to serve, you will end up serving. That's 99% case. It would be like a more extreme way of asking Americans to give up citizenship because of Trump. So I think that the notion of conscientious objection as a mass phenomenon is to not necessarily understand the psyche of what it means to be an 18 or 19-year-old in a system which is requested, and it's basically part of your civic identity is to be part of that. So that's regarding those questions.
I'm saying this from a source. A soldier once told me that when Palestinian village or struggle come to headlines or fame, so it can be individual by the soldiers or from command from above. They send soldiers to break the pride or achievement of the Palestinians, to let them know that even though you're now, you had this achievement, or you're criticizing Israel or the soldiers, we still the boss. That's simple. And I think it also can be just the routine of being occupation army. And for the lady here that asked I think you asked where was the soldiers, or where is the soldiers when there is a settlers violence, right? Well, I think one of the problems, I'm sorry, talking like this, I'm feeling like I'm lecturing one. But I think one of the problems among Israelis and Jewish that they think, and I truly understand that the army in Israel today and in this shape and form is legitimate, and he can solve something, or being in the occupied territories is something more than violent and especially just violent against Palestinians. They don't solve problems between settlers and Palestinians. They are occupying Palestinians. So when Israelis say, where the army, I think it's a little bit delusional.
You know, I think we have time for, I mean, it's,
Yeah,
yeah, okay, go ahead. 3 more, yeah, sure. Let's spend a little time on that one. I think it's really a question about identity of Arabs who live in Israel as Palestinians, as Israeli Arabs. This is, maybe you could speak about that.
Yeah. Okay, I can't, I don't represent the whole Palestinians or Arabs, but I think the majority identified as Palestinians, Arabs, Israeli citizen, or Arabs Israeli. I think, like in the past, Palestinians were used or obligated to say that they are Arab Israelis because we were not able to say we are Palestinians. It was forbidden. Actually, even today, I can't say I'm Palestinian to, any Israelis because it might be a long discussion that I don't want to go through with the bank, Kidab Bank. So I think the majority are Palestinian. Maybe they say Palestinian Israelis. I don't say Palestinian Israelis because I think part of saying Israeli, you have to have an emotional connection to this identity and not just, paper thing. And also because of the political situation, I feel more and more don't want to be identified or described or called as Israeli because there is a, mimad level, just level, emotional level that I can't with the Israeli identity. Also, and this is the important thing, because being Israeli is being Jewish. To be Israeli is to be Jewish. No one can say, anything else. And I don't want to be, the second-class citizen, and I don't want Israeli also to, because they tell you are a citizen and you are Israeli, but then they treated you as a Palestinian. So I think I don't want to play this Israeli game. I'm out of this, this game. I'm Palestinian citizen of Israel. That's what happened. Okay. And that's it.
Okay, I think this is going to be our last question because people are filtering in.
I can try to answer.
I will.
Everybody's coming in, really easy question to answer.
Right. Go ahead.
I actually think it's not the role. The question was regarding the dual system of administering law that I described in brief. That the word apartheid is a very problematic or difficult or challenging word, and should Americans be using that word? And so this isn't a cop-out answer. What I'm going to say, in order for it not to be a cop-out, I'll say sort of what I do. I'm really interested when explaining to somebody a situation, choosing language where the other side listens while not moderating the content of that language. And I find that there are some words where even if they're apt or not apt, or confusing or not confusing, they shut down a conversation. And the question is, what do I want to get across? The cop-out answer is that I really don't know. I don't want to be another Israeli coming to American Jews and explaining to them how to conduct sort of fights towards justice. I think the right does it very well. The left sometimes can fall into that area as well. We are definitely partners and allies in a lot of things, but I don't understand, and I wouldn't begin to believe that I understand the American political context in a way which I think is fair for you. I do think that from like an activist to activist perspective, we have to have good and serious engagement as to what we're trying to achieve, and find a way that we don't hurt each other, but we actually help each other in how we work. It's very clear for me that the language that I use is going to be different from the language that other people use, and even sometimes the calls that I have are going to be different than the calls that other people have. And I think that's a more respectful, like it's a more respectful way to do politics and activism. So I hope that answers sort of seriously your question.
Okay, I think we could go on and on, but I hear the voices of people filtering in. So thank you to the filmmakers, and thank you very much to the two of you.